Hey, what's going on? This is a video explaining borrowing chords from the parallel minor key for you, Rachel, to help you with a basic knowledge of understanding music theory and chords and what you can do with them. So, I have a tune, Misty. Here's the changes, and it has some moments that they use some interesting chords. But where do they come from? So let's back up a little bit. So basically, let's talk about what chords we have in a basic key, right? So in the key of C, if we're talking diatonically, well, what different kinds of chords do we have? We have one chord, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, right? And we all might know that the 5 chord is dominant, which means that it's basically the same as a major triad but has a flat 7, and we all know that that flat 7 in relation to the key is all like a natural note. There's no actual flat, it's just a lowered interval versus right a semitone. So we have different kinds of tonalities in each key, in each chord, right? So we have major on the first, minor on the second, minor again on the third, major on the fourth. But this is actually a really interesting chord because when you get there, it's actually more major than major. It's the brightest possible chord color, because if you have the key of C, you have F, A, C, but you also have B, right? That's very bright. That's more major than your typical major triad. It has that sharp 11, there it is right there, quality. And that's naturally occurring in the key. So on the 4 chord, we have a sharp 11. It's not actually sharp, it's just B natural. But in relation to the chord, that would be considered a raised note. Because normally in the key of F, if you have F major, right, you got that B flat. In the key of C, there's no B flat, right? So that's a sharp 11 voicing that you naturally find in every key. For example, E flat major. Here's our 4 chord. So sharp 11 is a really good note to consider when writing. When you have a 4 chord, you can just find the 4 in the key, the 4 of the 4, not Roman numerals, just 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's sharp 11 quality. Cool. And then on the 5 chord, we have our dominant sound, right? And that's again all naturally occurring in the key. And our minor on the 6, 7, so that's our half diminished, and it's half diminished because it's not fully diminished. Now, diminished chords are all based on minor thirds that are stacked, right? So you have minor third, and if you had another minor third, they would have A flat, which sounds nice, but that would be from our harmonic minor key, where you can get the fully diminished, right? You get C, so you'd have B natural, D, F, A flat, and B again. That would come from our harmonic minor key, but in the major key, you only get minor, minor, and then a major sound right there. That is a half diminished. So that's all our tonalities you get within like a normal typical key, a major key. So that should just be like review. It's kind of like common knowledge, really good to think about and just keep in mind, consider. But let's talk a little bit more about what we can do outside or closely related but not the same. So we're talking about the key of C major. What's its relative minor? Well, its relative minor would be either down 3 semitones or on the 6th scale degree. So that would be our A minor chord. But what if I were to say, what is its parallel minor key? What would the parallel minor of C major be? If you said C, that'd be right because C is parallel to C. Now just hear me out. So we have C minor and we have C major, right? So what can we do? You're thinking, well, those are not related at all. Like C has no sharps or flats, and E flat major that has 3 flats, and C minor that also has 3 flats. So you're saying, okay, well, those aren't really closely related, but they're very closely related, and the reason is because they have the same tonic, right? And the tonic basically means, now slap me if you know this already, but tonic is basically just like the bass note of the key, right? And I'm not talking about key signature, I'm just talking about the key. So the key is C, and we have C minor, and we have C major, right? And those are very closely related because they have the same bass note. So let's go through the minor key. So we have C minor, and then D diminished, and you could be fully diminished or half diminished, right? Lots of freedom there. If you want like that more open sound, then you can get the half diminished, and if you want the more crunch, you have the fully diminished. But then we get to the E flat, and that's why we all love the key of E flat. It's closely related to every key, basically. There's our E flat major, naturally occurring in C minor, right? So in a minor key, the 3rd, right, the 3 chord is major. So if you ever hear something like major 3, they're usually referencing the major 3rd from the parallel minor key. Like that's where it comes from. So then on the 4 chord in the major key, it was very major. It was Lydian. It was bright. It was like more major than major, right? But in the minor key, it's minor, typical minor. It's actually, I guess it would be Dorian mode. Yeah, Dorian mode, because it has that raised 6th. And again, it's raised not because of accidental, but just because it's naturally occurring in the key of C minor. There we go, is that raised 6 versus there's our natural minor. There's our Dorian minor with the natural 6, right? And so now you're seeing that on each chord, there's kind of like different colors that kind of exists in each shape, in each zone, naturally, right? These are harmonic chords. These are diatonic chords. So on the 5 chord in the minor key, something really interesting happens. So we could have it as G minor, again in the key of C. Could be G minor, totally fine. Or you could have it as G dominant. Right? So where does that dominant chord come from? Well, it comes from two places. Again, your dominant chord comes from the parallel of the minor key, which is the major. So the parallel of C minor is C major, right? And then in the dominant of the C major, there we have our G dominant chord, right, in the key of C major. But in this key of C minor, you can also use that dominant chord. So the 5 chord can always be minor or major. Doesn't matter. Any key, let's choose like F major, easy, right? So here we get to our 5 chord. So that could be like that. It could be dominant. It could be sort of like a 4, major 4, over 5. But it could also be minor. So that gives you options. That's a songwriting or harmonizing tip. So any 5 chord could be major or minor. And that's kind of the point of this video, and I'll love to talk about that just a little bit more. So back to the key of C, C minor, right? So on the 6th chord, something really interesting happens here. Here we have another major chord. So on the minor, we have major chords on the 3 and the 6, whereas on the major, we have major chords on the 1 and the 4. And that's good to remember. And then on the 7, here's one of the most magical moments of all. So when we get to the 7 of a minor key, and in the key of C minor, major, minor, doesn't matter, we get to B flat major. And here's what it looks like. Right? So there's our B flat major. That's such a bright, happy sound. How could that be in a minor key? Well, it just naturally exists because of typical diatonic theory, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, flat, 7, major. And again, it's not like the notes are lowered like as an accidental, they're just naturally lowered by existing in the key of C minor. Now this is the key point. This is the whole point of this video. So you can borrow any chord from the parallel key. So if we're in the key of E flat major, right? There's our 1, major 1. We can all of a sudden go down a whole step to D flat major. And you're thinking, okay, well, D flat major and E flat major, E flat has 3 flats, D flat has like what, 5? They're not related at all. But again, because of the parallel minor key, they're very closely related. So listen to how good that sounds. Check it out. E flat major, D flat major. You know, every single like junior high band piece, like Floating in the Clouds, or you know, like Rascal's Journey to the Rainbow Forest, whatever, you know, you always hear that change. And you're like, oh, I love that one moment. Oh, why does it sound so good? They're going to the flat 7 major of the parallel minor key. right? And that's a really useful trick. So another thing you can do is, we're in the key of C major. Go to the 4 chord, but make it minor instead. And now that you're in the key of flats, you know, you have a lot of options. So you can go and like here I'm beautifully in, you know, the key of E flat. Out of nowhere, heck, go to D flat, and like here I am in the key of, you know, G flat major. Back to F minor. Back to C major. I was in G flat, D flat, E flat, you know, all flat keys, but again, closely related from C. And it didn't sound that weird. And with some, like, you know, actual planning and forethought and, you know, good voice leading, you can make anything work. So I implore you, young musician, composer, to explore your major keys, but not just your relative minors, but also your parallel minors, because they're extremely useful to be able to use new chords that are closely related in a way you've never actually really maybe thought about before. So that's the point of the video. And here's a good example of parallel chords being used. So here, Misty, right? Second chord, it goes to B flat 7. So where does that come from? Well, it probably comes from the natural minor key. And there it is. The 5, like I said, 1, 5, that's a minor chord, not a major chord. Major chord for the 1, minor 5 for the 5, back to the 1, but now they make that 1 a dominant. That's another useful tip. You can just take any chord and just make it a 7 chord. Not a major 7, but just a full-on 7 chord. And that's going to bring us nicely to A flat, which it does. So now in 2 measures, not even in a whole measure, 1 measure, we've modulated to the 1 to the 4. But now we're going to do the same trick. Here we go. A flat major 7. Next measure, A flat minor 7. They just went full on major to the minor. That's like a Picardy change, right? So the next chord, D flat 7, where does that come from? Well, if we're in A flat 7, minor 7, you could say that the A flat could be the 2 of G flat major. And that's where our D flat 7 chord comes from. Right? And if we're at D flat 7,
that's the debate of every like board game owner is like fucking losing pieces now.
that's closely related to our E flat minor chord, because D flat 7 is closely related to E flat minor, therefore it's closely related to E flat major as well. So that's why when it goes back to E flat major, it sounds so good. And then the next change, C minor, which is just like your typical 1 to 6, to the 2, to the 5, and then we'll, you know, there's a typical turnaround here. But on the second ending, it's, we hear that flat 7 change, which is so cool and so pretty. So here we are at the E flat major, and then to the C minor, to the F minor, and then back to the tonic, the original key, back to the flat 7, down to the flat 7, So there you go. There's like a good example of chords in a key, and you're thinking, okay, I don't understand how they're related, they make no sense, but they actually are very logical, because the parallel chords of the parallel minor or parallel major is one of the most valuable tools. And even there, you saw an example where I'm like, the parallel chord of this key is closely related to, what was it exactly? D7 is closely related to E flat minor, which is closely related to E flat major. So therefore, those two chords work together. You can just remove like the transformation, and it just works seamlessly. So this will be a quick performance of the first half of Misty for you to learn and listen from.
Wonder if it's on the floor somewhere. I have to check it out.
E flat major to the B flat minor, which is the 5, the minor 5, modulating to E flat 7, which is the 5 of A flat major, which it goes to, circling around the major 7. Now parallel minor of A flat minor to the D flat 7, which is related to the G flat major, which is related to the E flat minor again.
For sure, yeah. I know
Here's another change. So C minor, F minor, B flat. Now here's the really special part. 1, E flat major to the flat 7, back to the 1. And there you go. That's a good example of parallel minor chords being used in a harmonic setting, and it sounds great. So yeah.